Is it actually different? Or was it the case that you didn't have to cover up at the time? That's just what you'd been told and that's what you believed.
No, you had to cover up.
Did have to.
They wouldn't have even let you into the border.
And in terms of opportunities, then, which are the countries that have the biggest opportunities?
I mean, obviously, there's still a lot of opportunity in the UAE, like in Dubai. There's like, for example, real estate is through the roof.
It's still half of what you're describing as one residence. And it's
Mhm,
like the biggest, most prestigious spot in the whole of New
mhm.
York, in Manhattan. That's frightening. 500 million.
But if you were actually gonna, in the traffic jam, step out, or you step out, let's say, outside of the hotel to go from the taxi into the hotel, you'd be like, whoa, like you literally get hit with this heat.
It's just mad, isn't it? This week on the Engaging Marketeer, I am speaking to Corina Goetz about Saudi Arabia and Dubai and how you can go out there to do business. What are the requirements? What are the legalities? What opportunities are there? How much money you can make? And specifically, what it means to be a woman going out and working and doing business in these places. Because that is what Corina does. She advises people on how to go out and work in Saudi Arabia and in Dubai and across the United Arab Emirates. Can you explain in a nutshell what it is you actually do and why?
Okay. I don't know if I can do it very quickly in one or two sentences
Well, I know
because
it's a complex thing, isn't it?
yeah, it's quite there's quite a lot of layers to it. So what I do is I help companies and individuals that either have projects out in the Middle East and their team like isn't really familiar with like Saudi or UAE or Qatar. And I help companies and people that work with clients from that region. And maybe they want to expand more, get more clients, and build the relationship better just because, they haven't got the funds to go there every couple of months to work on the relationship because in the Middle East, relationships is everything. And how this came about is actually, well, my background is in hotels, in five-star hotels. So I have worked with clients from Saudi, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait since sort of the early 2000s, so quite a long
Mhm.
time, over about 20 odd years. And when I first started, I had no clue because, I think, and this is what people find always so interesting. I don't speak any Arabic. I haven't grown up there. I had no prior exposure to that culture because I am
You
German.
sound perfect for it then.
Yeah, so I had no clue when I came to London and started working in hotels. That was my first experience. And what I very quickly found is that the people that I worked with made a lot of assumptions. There were a lot of people that were like, "Oh my God, these clients are so difficult. We really don't want to deal with them." And I didn't actually find that. I thought, oh, but that's really weird because I got on really well with them, and they actually really like me. And I don't know why everybody else has so many difficulties, but I think what it came down to was that I took a little bit of an interest in their culture. I took a little bit of an interest in them as people, and that made all the difference. And that's what everybody else didn't. And then it kind of developed from there, and I just loved it. And then I think my first trip out to Dubai and then to Qatar was like 2005. So it was really like very different to what it is now. Obviously, already quite developed, but it was interesting and it opened my eyes to a lot more things. And so that were kind of like the beginnings. But then fast forward to 2011, that was the first time I went to Saudi. And Saudi was very different back then. And again, I was like, I have no idea. I don't know who to ask. There was no woman in my field around me who had ever been. They told me it's very tricky. We'll have to see if you can get a visa or not, and you have to get somebody to sponsor you. Then it has to go to the ministry, then it goes to the embassy, and then maybe if you're lucky, you'll get the visa. I did, but then I had all these other questions. So how am I supposed to dress? What am I supposed to know? And there were so many things that I just didn't know. And I was very like, oh my God, what is this trip gonna be like?
Mm.
And it was so interesting because back then you had to cover up as a woman. So literally an hour before we landed in Saudi, all the women on the plane would go into the bathroom to change. and covered their hair and put on an abaya. So that's also what I did because somebody had told me, obviously, bring this, otherwise they won't even let you in. Okay, so that was fine. But there were so many other things that I just didn't know and that I was really puzzled by. And then, of course, when COVID hit, so quite a few years later, that kind of coincided very much with Saudi opening up. And suddenly, like this was no more. Like you could get a tourist visa, people would go, you didn't have to cover up. Suddenly, tourism was a thing and people wanted to really like showcase their country. And I was like, wow, there must be loads more people that have questions like I did back then, even though it is very different now. But what people still have in their mind is what it used to be like, because that's what they heard about. And because Saudi has transformed so fast, they don't know what it's like now. And a lot of women have so many questions. And that's kind of where I come in now, that if somebody has a project, specifically in Saudi, there's a lot of focus in Saudi at the minute, just because there is all these projects and there is a lot of money and they're doing a lot of events. Um, so this is where I come in now, and I can give them a bit of a crash course on the whole thing and say, okay, this is what it is about. These are like maybe some of the differences, but don't worry about it. You know, like you're gonna be fine, because people are generally terrified of going there if they
You,
have never been.
you say when you first went, you were on the plane and you were told you had to cover up, and everyone was covering up, and it's different now. It's transformed. Is it actually different, or was it the case that you didn't have to cover up at the time? That's just what you'd been told, and that's what you believed.
No, you had to cover up.
Did have to.
They wouldn't have even let you into the border.
Right.
And I mean, there was so many more things. Like I can tell you so many more stories. Like, for example, like back at that time, it was very it was very strange because people would tell you you have to be really careful even if you're there on business as a woman, because the rule at the time was that as a woman you could only be out in public with either your father or your husband. If you were meeting a man that was not related to you like that, the religious police could come into the restaurant and, I don't know, give you a fine, take you away, I don't know what. And people were generally terrified of this. And I remember, and again, it was just something I didn't know. And let's remember, I had been to the Gulf. I had been to like a lot of the other countries around it, but I'd just never been to Saudi. Like it was so conservative that even, you know, you had the restaurants and even the coffee shops. So like Starbucks, for example, they had two entrances. So I said to my driver at the time, because I was on a work trip, I said, oh, can you just stop at Starbucks? I just want to have a coffee. And he was like, yeah, yeah, sure. So I'd like look at the Starbucks and I think there's two entrances. Like, this is weird. Which one should I go? One was single, one was family. And I thought, well, clearly I'm not a family. I'll go into the single one. And the barista nearly had a heart attack. He was like, no, you cannot come in here. This is just for single men. You're a woman. You should be going to the family entrance. I was like, nobody told me this kind of stuff. And it's not like that anymore. So it was very, very different to what like Dubai was back then, Qatar was back then. Like I'd not seen anything like this in any of the other countries. And I was generally really puzzled. And I was like, oh my God. And then you think, you know, like I'm here on business. I'm supposed to take out clients, but what if the religious police is going to come and take me away? Like, I don't know who's going to help me. It was just so strange. And there were just so many different things that I just never came across. And so I'm generally not surprised that people worry about this, because this is the perception they still have. And it's not like that anymore. I mean, of course, it is a lot more conservative than, for example, Dubai, but it's very safe, it's very open, but it's just people don't know enough about it. And people are very hospitable. And I think that's one of the other interesting things, that I always felt that even in London, the clients from that region were very much stereotyped. They were all put like into one pot. People would say to me, oh, but they don't even speak English, or like they don't have a clue when they come to London. Like we can charge them anything. And I would be like, but that's not really right. I'm sorry, but you're really projecting an assumption here, and that's not correct. And why this, I think it took me a while to understand why this bothered me so much, but essentially it came back to like what I experienced when I grew up, because I actually grew up in East Germany and I was 12 when the wall came down. And very much after the wall came down, the stereotyping was so crazy in Germany. Like people in the West would say, "Ah, but you're from the East, you haven't got any clue." And it would really bother me because I'd be like, "Yeah, but I'll work hard to try and like, make up the knowledge." But then vice versa, because at the time, my or much later when I was already in London and I met my now husband, he was from the West, and my grandparents would be like, what is this family like? They're probably really arrogant. I'm like, bloody hell. Like, just take a chill pill. This is crazy. Like, you haven't even met the people. And and that's why I think that also that stereotyping then with the Middle East bothered me so much, because I felt like I was a stereotype and I hated every minute of it. So I kind of felt I don't really want anybody else to go through this because it's not okay.
Yeah. So yeah, so it definitely changed then. Um, Whenabouts did it change in Saudi Arabia, and why?
It changed very much. It started changing slowly in 2015. And the reason it started changing in 2015 is because they had a change in rulership. So the previous king passed away, and it is now King Salman who came in 2015. And then it took sort of like about 2 years, because I think what many people just don't know about the Gulf, like the hierarchy, how people become king or crown prince is quite set, and it's normally it conforms to certain rules. You have to be, normally it's something like it's your oldest son or whatever. So there's a lot of layers to that. And so in the years prior to that, the king was always fairly old, so was the crown prince. So, I mean, the king now, King Salman, is in his 80s. However, previously, the crown princes were also very old. They were like in their 70s and stuff. So obviously, they had a very different experience of what they wanted for the country. And now the crown prince is in his late 30s. So, first of all, it was a break with traditions, and there were a lot of other things going on at the time. But he obviously understood what the majority of the population in Saudi wanted, because 63% of the Saudis are under 35. So, how can you expect,
Mhm.
like when you're that much older, to understand what the younger generation wants? And I think once he came in, then they started bringing in all these, like, the vision for the country and what kind of he started bringing in entertainment and things like that, and he just never did this before. And it wasn't like that this wasn't controversial, because there were still a lot of people that were not in agreement with it, but I think he kind of just became like such a strong leader and assembled such a strong team that he really like pushed ahead with this whole thing, and that's what it transformed it so much. I mean, of course, with the sort of like blessing of his father. But what is also really interesting is a lot of the other royal family that maybe would have been in the succession much higher, they had studied in the West, and he actually hasn't. He studied in Saudi Arabia. And one of the things was he shadowed his dad when he was the governor of Riyadh. So he saw how his father dealt with like all the tribal issues and all of these things. So I think he had a very good understanding of how to manage all these different fractions, because let's not forget, like the royal family in Saudi, there's over like 30,000 members of that. So
Really?
like, yeah. So like how can you bring everybody into agreement? There's lots of tribal fractions and things like that. So there's a lot, I think, that goes with this that had to be considered for this opening up. Yeah, and but he essentially was the one who kind of very much pushed ahead with all these changes and implemented all these different things that, like, and I know, like, we in the West, we've had this for years, but that like women could start driving from 2018. They had their first cinemas in 2018, which sounds so bizarre, because to us in the West, we're like, what do you mean? They had no cinemas until 2018, but they didn't, because it was forbidden. And now they have all of this. So it's a massive change for the whole population, but it's a good change, especially for the younger population, because there's a lot more stuff to do. And they're really investing on education and lots of different things, which was never there before.
Hmm. And you mentioned that they managed to get everybody in line to do this. Normally, when you bring change like this in, there's hardliners that won't accept it, and there's going to be resistance, and there's going to be rebellions or protests about it. Has there been any of that where there's people that just say, no, this isn't the way it should be happening?
I think there was, but I think he brought them very quickly in line. And again, I think that's very it's a controversial subject, but I think for him to do what he wanted to do, there was just no other choice. There was, I think in 2017, and I don't remember if because it's not something that was so much in the mainstream, but in 2017 there were a lot of people that were charged with corruption and they were locked up in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. I don't know if you remember that, but
No.
they called it the Night of the Long Knives. And it was a mixture of people, business people, prominent Saudi figures. And I guess, that was his way of putting his foot down. But I think it is what it is. It's not, like it's a different system of the way they govern. But when you look back at all of this now, I think it worked for the population because a lot of the population is much better off now, and they have used the wealth that the country had, which obviously they have vast resources, to try and make the life of like the average person better. And you have a lot more younger people now in employment and looking for jobs and things, because that also was not really a thing, because a lot of people used to live off the oil revenues and things. So there was a lot of unemployment, and there wasn't really people just like getting a job in tourism or something. This wouldn't have crossed people's minds, I think. And, and now this is it's a real vision, because it's a vision for the country and it's a vision for them to do something and give something back. I think you also have to give people a bit of inspiration, that you want to be part of something. And I think that's what had been missing for quite some time. And I think, and I mean, of course, they had reforms and things before, but it was never to that extent.
Mm. You mentioned that it's still more conservative than Dubai. What are the main differences then in the two?
I mean, there's, for example, there is you can't drink alcohol in like hotels or things. It's just not available. I mean, there is I think there is a shop now in the diplomatic quarter if you're like a diplomat, and obviously in these sort of Western compounds you can get it, but you cannot get it like you get it in Dubai in hotels, things like that. I think generally, if you go there, like as a woman, you would dress a bit more conservatively, like you wouldn't necessarily go like in a mini skirt and stuff, which actually used to be the case in Dubai. But with all these expats now, I don't know, it's just I find it very odd. I remember when I first went to Dubai, they were all like, just make sure like your shoulders are covered. And if you wear like skirts, wear them like these long skirts and stuff. And that's very much what it is like in Saudi now. I mean, if you go to Dubai now, you have like the crop tops and the mini skirts, and you're like, how the hell did that happen? Because you don't really have that in the rest of the UAE. Like if, for example, if you were going to go to Abu Dhabi, I don't think that would be acceptable. It's just because Dubai now, there's way more expats than locals. And I think the majority of the locals live in sort of like, yes, there is a few people in Dubai that are locals, but anyone who does a lot of business with the government and stuff, they are based somewhere else. They're based in Abu Dhabi, or they're based in other places, and they're not as open as Dubai.
Hmm.
But there's still rules that I mean, people think, oh yeah, yeah, anything goes in Dubai. But that's not quite true either, because every once in a while, people get in trouble because they forget that they're still in an Islamic country and certain things are just not done.
I've got to ask, like what?
Like having sex on the beach, or
Oh, right, yeah, that's
drinking like,
that's generally frowned upon in any country, but yeah,
well, yeah, yeah, but you probably wouldn't necessarily go to jail for this unless it's an Islamic country,
fair enough.
Like you'd probably get maybe like a fine or something like that. No, but I think there is a lot of things that are good as well, because so for example, because of the religion, like stealing is not really a thing um in any of these countries. Yes, because they're very heavily surveilled, and like you wouldn't get very far if you steal something. I told the story on LinkedIn. I had a friend in Abu Dhabi and he had his bike stolen, and he went to the police station, and the police guy said to him, "Oh yeah, it's fine. We'll just text the thief." And he was like, "What do you mean we text the thief?" And they were like, "Yeah, yeah, like we can see who this was. We can really with facial recognition and whatever." So they did, and the bike turned back up. And he said, I forget, oh my God, I forget the exact numbers, but I think he said, "Oh, how many of these cases do you have?" And they said, "Oh, I think we had about 60." He said, "Oh, in a year?" And he said, "No, since we opened 10 years ago." So it kind of just shows you, because the people that
Oh,
steal, especially if they're like expats, they get expelled and you can't do nothing. Like the minute something like this happens, you're out. So of course, that's why the crime rate is so little in any of these countries. And that's why I think like now, for example, with Dubai, I mean, it's a very similar thing in Saudi. Like you can go to a coffee shop, you leave your bag, you leave your laptop, it's still there when you come back. If you go to the bathroom or whatever, like this would not happen over here. Like it would be gone. You hadn't even stepped away for 2 steps. It would be gone. But that's why a lot of people like now want to move to Dubai, because if you look in London, if, for example, you were very wealthy and you had an expensive bag or an expensive Rolex, or I don't know, you wouldn't really walk around with this, because you kind of think, oh, I mean, like even your iPhone now these days gets stolen in London, like without nothing.
mm.
So, and this wouldn't happen over there. So you can go out and take your jewelry out, your expensive cars, your expensive bags, whatever, like nothing will happen to you. So you can use that all in public. And of course, I think that's the appeal for a lot of people.
Got to admit, I do like the sound of that. My youngest's moped was stolen last summer, within a few hours of her buying it.
Ugh,
And the police knew the kind of people that had taken it, because it happened so often in the area. There's so many bikes being taken, and it took me a week, but I did manage to get it back using social media. But we had so many reports of bike spottings. I thought, is this it? Is this it? Of bikes that have been stolen. And my youngest went to 3 different sites during that week of where bikes had been dumped and burned out, because that's what they're doing with them. They're stealing them, they're riding them around, they're setting fire to them, they're gone. And the police aren't doing anything about it. And it is so
wow.
frustrating that it's just so common. They're not even bothering to investigate, because they know there's just no point in doing it. Whereas in Dubai or Saudi Arabia, it just doesn't happen. Doesn't
It's
happen.
it's crazy. It's really crazy to think, because we had our car stolen outside our house. And the police was like, and it was not even an expensive car. It was like a box standard Kia. And I was like, what the hell? And people just steal it for like, and of course the police did nothing. They never found it. It's like, yeah, it just happens. I'm like, what do you mean it just happens? Like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So despite the low crime rate, or zero crime rate almost, what are the main advantages to going to Saudi Arabia from a business perspective, and particularly for a woman doing it?
I mean, first of all, I think there is a lot of opportunities there with these big projects that they have. So whether you're like in construction or an interior designer, or you're educating on some subject, or you're working in hospitality, there is a lot of new and exciting things happening that don't seem to be happening anywhere else in the world. And I think that creates a new kind of opportunity. Plus, I think they need the expertise from the West, because their population is so young and they want them to develop. But I mean, how else would you develop if you don't bring in experts that can teach?
Hmm.
And I think, not just Saudi Arabia, but also like the rest of the Gulf, UAE, the tax is a lot more favorable. I think the lifestyle seems to be a lot more appealing to many many people. But I have to say, at times like this now in the summer, just this week, I read the temperatures are up to like 50 degrees. So this is not fun. Like now is not a time to go. And you actually get a warning saying it's not safe for you to go outside. I mean, don't get me wrong, they have air conditioning everywhere, but you literally can't function without air conditioning because it's dangerous to be out in these temperatures.
Wow, that's
I
mad.
know. That's why
Uh,
people leave in the summer. They're like, come June, we need to leave.
Do you know,
It's too
funny enough,
hot.
I was speaking to a photographer I know yesterday. She's from Pakistan, and she said she went to Dubai and she found it cold. And it was cold because everywhere, including the car parks, is air conditioned.
Yeah.
So anywhere that you go is aircon and it's cold. So you never actually get to venture out into the non-air conditioned parts, which I found quite strange.
Not much. That's very true. And I think that's also where you can underestimate things very quickly because it is really cold and you can catch a cold very quickly. So like you go into like a taxi and you feel like, I don't know, they have the AC down to 15 degrees. So if you don't have a jacket on, it's freezing. But if you were actually gonna in the traffic jam step out, or you step out, let's say outside of the hotel to go from the taxi into the hotel, you'd be like, whoa, like you literally get hit with this heat.
It's just mad, isn't it? It's
It's
mad.
it's really mad. Like in the summer, I mean, there's certain parts, for example, in Saudi, where they have like mountains and things where you can go where the temperatures are actually like manageable, sort of like 28, 29 degrees, which is fine. And there's a place in Oman where actually a lot of people go in the summer called Salala, and it's very green, but that has a very different climate to the rest of the Gulf. So like if you look at places like Dubai or Riyadh or something, I would not advise to go into the summer. I mean, I went once for a wedding in June and I was like, never again. Like this, like it was just too much. You couldn't go because even the sea, if you were going to go and step out in the sea, it felt like it was like an overcooked jacuzzi. That's the best way to describe it.
The
And you
sea.
think, like I'm not here for that. Like like the sea kind of needs to be cold.
Mm.
And I don't think anybody would fancy roasting in 50 degrees by the pool.
So, what important advice, I suppose. What are the months when you should be going, and what's the months you should be completely avoiding?
So you should definitely avoid July and August. June can be a bit borderline depending on how it is. September in the beginning sometimes can also be still quite warm. But then I'd say from October all the way until maybe end of April, middle of May is normally a good time to go. I mean, the peak time is when it's really horrible here, to be honest.
Mm.
November, December, January, February, when you're like here, you think, oh, I just need some sun. That's a good time to go because the sun is there and that's when people go normally.
Okay. And in your business, then, what sort of clients are you working with, and what help are you giving them?
So it's a real mix of people. So for example, I've worked with like a law company and they were opening up an office in Saudi and they had an events team that were going to do an event to with their clients. However, the events team was from London and the majority of them were women and they had never been. And they were a bit like, oh, we have to go to Saudi. Like, what does that even mean?
Mm.
So I then, did a session with them and looked at first to just give them a bit of an overview for them to understand what they were walking into. Then they had a lot of different questions as well. They were very event specific, like how far in advance should we send out invites and is there anything we shouldn't serve and all of these kind of things. So that's sort of one client. Then I I had a client that was a hotel company in the US, and they have a lot of Middle Eastern clients, but they were like, we don't really have the resources to go out there all the time, and we still want to build relationships. How else can we do that? Like, what social media should we use? When should we reach out? What are good times? How can we position our offers? So we did that whole thing, and we did a whole session on that, and they had their marketing team, their revenue team, their sales team on it. So it really depends. I had a client here in London who had Middle Eastern clients, and they wanted to get more, and very similar, like how could they align their strategy? How could they reach out better? What else could they do that was, I mean, like in any business, that's centered around the client and not what we thought the client wanted. So yeah, so it's a real mix. I also did a consultation with a lady who had a job interview out there, really high powered job. And she was, okay, I don't need a lot. I just need an hour of your time. I'm going to show you my outfits. I want you to tell me which outfit I should wear for that job interview and why. And I'm interviewing for this company. Do you know anything about this company? Can you give me some background on it? What else should I know? Can you compress for me what the country wants to achieve so I look like I know what I'm talking about? So those are the kind of things that I can help with.
Oh, that's an interesting one. What outfit should I wear?
Yeah.
What I'm talking about women's fashion here. This is never thought this would happen. What kind of outfit was it? Can you remember that you did go for?
Yeah. She had two outfits, and it was one was as well, I think they were both suits. One was pink and I don't know, pink and white, and the other one was green and white. And it was an interview in Saudi, and I said you need to wear green and white because
Hmm.
the color of the Saudi flag is green and white. And she was like, "Oh my God, I
I would
never
have
thought."
said that as well.
Yeah. So it was that kind, so it's those kind of things that sometimes, you have small things, but they can make a big difference.
Hmm. And in terms of opportunities, then, which are the countries that have the biggest opportunities?
I mean, obviously, there's still a lot of opportunity in the UAE, like in Dubai. There's like, for example, real estate is through the roof in Dubai at the moment. But the question is, how long is that bubble gonna last? And that's primarily driven by the fact that due to the Russian and the Ukrainian conflict, a lot of Eastern Europeans have relocated to Dubai.
Does that mean people in Europe, though, can afford to invest in property in Dubai?
They can, and it's almost like like you buy, let's say, a property and you sell it 6 months later at like double the price. It's that crazy at the minute. If you want to rent an apartment and you have to pay 12 months in advance, and if you're unlucky, you get somebody from Eastern Europe who outbids you, and then it's gone. It's that competitive at the minute. So like the real estate is literally through the roof. I
That's
think they said something, figures that I heard was something that within 1 year, about 800,000 Russians moved to Dubai. And they all obviously, were fairly well off, and they all needed properties and things like that. So,
and why did they are they escaping the conflict or?
yeah. And I think it was also because it was safe. It was a very luxurious environment. You have luxury hotels, you have luxury shops.
Hmm.
The weather is generally good aside from the summer. It's very easily connected, and you can do business because a lot of people come through Dubai because it's a big hub.
Hmm.
So it's very it's a very sought after place at the minute, but it wasn't always like that because real estate just prior to COVID wasn't doing that well at all. And now everything that I read, every single week I read, oh, they had another record month in Dubai. They sold this record apartment. And I have a friend who's a real estate agent out there, and he's like, it's such a crazy market at the minute. He's like, if you had invested, let's say, in 2020 and you had bought an apartment, you probably could have sold this for I don't know how many X amount by now. Like it's crazy, but who knows? These things always go in cycles, right?
Yeah, it's got to come down at some point. Has to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is very lucrative at the minute. So yeah, but it is very challenging if, for example, you want to now move out to Dubai and find accommodation, it's quite pricey.
Hmm. And that's to buy or to rent.
That's to buy or to rent. It's the same thing. Yeah. I mean, and to rent, it's also, I have a friend who lives out in Dubai, and he just got a new apartment last year, which is, I think, 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. And I think he pays something like 3 to 4 thousand euros a month, and then you have to pay a broker, and the broker took another 2K. But so he's been in this apartment, I think, for 6 months. I think they signed a 12-month lease, and they've just told him, well, actually, we've changed our mind. We want to sell that apartment, so you're going to be out. You have to be out by 12 months. So then he has to go through that cycle again, find a new apartment, pay a new broker. So yeah, very competitive.
Mm, nasty, nasty. So if someone's thinking of going to work in Saudi Arabia, what are the main things they should be looking out for? What's the main advice you can be giving?
I think first of all, I think it's a question whether you want to relocate with your family or whether you're single. I think if you're single, this is probably a great place to get started if you want to work for a couple of years, make some good money. I think some of the projects are not as advanced that you can move your whole family out there because there's just not enough accommodation and schools and grounds. Because some of these big projects, for example, like NEOM, which are up in the northwest of Saudi Arabia, they just haven't got enough infrastructure for like to accommodate sort of like a proper expat lifestyle. But if you just go out on your own, you'll totally be fine, and you can really, make some really good money on these projects. I think what I would say is you have to go out with an open mind. I think the what they're paying is way more what they're paying in Europe, but they also work you hard for it. Like it's not going to be an easy ride. Like yes, you get paid very well, but you will also have to deliver very well. But I think it's something exciting to be part of because it's something that's nowhere else in the world. And some of these projects are really like mind blowing, and they just do things that you never thought were possible for like for tourism, for sustainability, for things that they want to do. Um, I mean, I was talking with somebody who worked for NEOM, and he told me they were creating residences that they were gonna sell one residence for like 500,000, no, sorry, 500 million, so 500 million per residence. And it would involve something like extra nature and different things, and they were just working on all the different concepts. And he was like, that obviously appeals to a very specific kind of client with specific kind of money, but that's the kind of scale of it.
Jesus.
It's mad. I mean, like what could you possibly get for 500 million in a house with nature, with land, that would justify that price tag? I don't know.
I know. There's a building in New York, relatively new building, quite a narrow skyscraper overlooking
Yeah.
Central Park, and it's got the penthouse of that. So it's a small footprint because you're right up in the air,
Yeah.
and it's something like quarter of a million, sorry, 250 million, I think it was. So it's still half of what you're describing as one residence, and it's
Mhm.
like the biggest, most prestigious spot in the whole of New
Mhm.
York in Manhattan. That's frightening. 500 million.
That's mental. It's so
A
crazy, but
house.
but I do think they will come up with something that will be so appealing to a certain kind of audience. If you have that kind of money, that's almost gonna become like a must or like a must have, just to show that you can.
Yeah, yes, was a lot of the buildings they're doing out there are just to show that you can do it. I mean, the Burj Khalifa was all about let's see how big we can build a skyscraper.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so I think we will hear a lot more. And of course, like looking at Europe now and even the US with all the instability and the recession and everything, it's not really surprising that people would go and look for different ways to find, different work.
And you say going out there to work as well. Well, this isn't just your average man from the pub thinking, "Do you know what, I'm going to go off to Saudi Arabia and I'm going to earn this ridiculous money." What kind of skills and talents are they looking for?
I think it really depends on the projects. There's a lot of people going out for construction. There's also people going out like that work in like data centers, for example, because digital is really advanced out there in the whole of the region. There's people going out for like event safety because they're bringing out all these big events, not now in the summer, but for example in autumn, which I would probably say from like October to March, they have something called Riyadh season every year, which is sort of like it's a mix of like sport and cultural events and things. And every single year, I think it's been running, I think like 3 years maybe, or four at max. Every year it's gotten bigger. And last year, which is just finished, they started off with all the boxing. But I saw the brochure for Riyadh season, 300 pages. They brought in a Disney castle from I think from Florida or wherever it was.
Of course they
Ronaldo
did. Of
got
course
his,
they
of
did. Of course they did.
course, of course. You had like a food truck festival where they brought all food trucks from around the world. Ronaldo got his own museum. Like there was something going on all the time, but not just for tourism or for expats. It was also for the local population. And it was packed because I remember I was out there in November and they have a place there called Boulevard World, which is almost a bit like, it's like a mini around the world. Like you go in and you get like a mini China and you can eat Chinese food and they, replicated some of the sites. And I was actually only there for an hour and I was like, I just want to walk around and see all the different ones and not like stop. So I walked around. It took me 1 hour to get around the whole place. And I didn't even stop and do lots of different things, but they had like, like little cable cars. They had like a little lake where people could go on boats and it was wild. And like the place was packed with families, with kids, with like it was really nice. And that was just one of the things they were doing. So it's really interesting. And I'm sure you saw that obviously last year they brokered a couple of these Tyson Fury fights
Yeah.
that were out there, and there's more to come, I think. So yeah, like it continues to grow.
And of course they've started golf as well. They've effectively, as papers have said, they've bought golf.
Golf, F1, I think tennis is coming. But but what is really interesting with the sport, and I know with the sport again, it's very controversial, but what I really loved, I was at a conference in London the other week, and it was women in sports in the Middle East, and they had a lot of attendance from Saudi, and they were actually telling us that the female Saudi football team, the national team, the female players are paid exactly the same as the men.
Mm.
And I thought that was really nice.
That's unusual. That's unusual. That doesn't happen a lot in most nations.
No, and there's a real big push for like gender equal pay also in a lot of these big projects they were saying, and I didn't know that. So I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Mm. You mentioned Ronaldo there, and I think I've got to ask this. I don't know if you're the person to ask. It's not really understood in the UK how so many top players from around the world are going to Saudi Arabia to play football, and they're paying them huge sums of money to do it. Yet the crowds we're seeing at the games are a few hundred or a couple of thousand. Whereas if you're playing in Germany or France or Italy, Spain, the UK, you're getting anything from 40,000 to 100,000 at Barcelona. There doesn't seem to be the demand from it from a paying public to watch, yet they're able to keep paying these players more money than they could get anywhere else. How is that? How are the sums working with that? How are they doing it and why?
I think one of it is, I mean, of course, there's a big PR angle to it, but it, from the Saudi perspective, I think, because one of their big goals is that they want to encourage tourism to the country. And if you don't have anybody of prominence coming there or experiencing there, then I think it's a lot harder to attract Western tourists because you also need to create awareness. So I think that's one part. I think from the player's angle, I think, yes, of course, there is an element of money attached to it, but I think it's also because there's a lot of other business opportunities in Saudi. So, for example, like with Ronaldo, I think, he has restaurants, he has like hotels, he has a lot of other. He's actually very savvy with this whole,
Mm.
um, I think, transfer. And not only that, I think they get treated very well. And contrary, I think, to what a lot of the papers say, I don't think he would have stayed if he really hated being there and if he felt it wasn't the right thing for his family. And I think some of the other things we touched on earlier, that it's very safe and that people are very friendly and they're very hospitable. And he consistently has said, my family is actually really happy here and the kids love school and everything. And I think no amount of money, they could have not paid him enough if everybody else at home was unhappy. So I think it's a real combination of stuff. And this is what I find so interesting because if you look at some of the media here in the UK, they say, oh my God, these wives of the footballers, they're really struggling. I'm like, I don't know. First of all, maybe nobody has prepared them. Secondly, I don't know if that's actually true because there's a big expat community. They have a lot of luxurious shops. They have a lot of luxurious hotels. They have very similar amenities to here. Okay, fine. They may not be able to go to a store and buy a lot of alcohol, but even as an expat, you can get alcohol because there is alcohol available in these compounds. So it's not that you can't. But I think of course, it was going to be a different situation. But considering all the other factors, that it's safe, that you can go out, that people are very friendly, I think that also plays a role because the Saudis in general are very, very hospitable. And even if they don't speak English, they really try because now I remember I had an Uber driver and he didn't speak English and I had to change my destination and I just couldn't do it on the app. But you have Google Translate. So we communicated over Google Translate and he was like, yeah, yeah, no problem. I'll take you to a new destination. Where over here, they probably would have been like, no way. Like, too bad. Find another Uber or
Yeah.
something. So they
Even if
really
you're talking in English to English person, yeah, they're like, no, no,
yeah.
not doing it, mate, not doing it. Yeah.
And then also like the people that you deal with in terms of business, it's a very family-oriented environment. Like people will invite you to their houses, you will get to meet their family, they'll take you, into their house for dinner. This doesn't really happen in the West. Like that kind of community you don't really have. So, I find that really fascinating that people will open their home, their families to you, even if they like you haven't known them for that long. And I think that's quite nice.
Hmm. Well, you're selling it to me. You're selling it to me. Because from a football perspective, the biggest worry for me, I'm a Liverpool supporter, is the player that the Saudi Arabians really want is Mo Salah, because
Yeah.
he is the most famous Muslim player and
Yeah.
he is the poster boy for Muslim football. And
Yeah.
by the time this podcast goes out, we'll know the answer. But I have a feeling they're going to come in with a very, very large bid for Mo Salah, and he's going to find it very difficult not to accept it because it's where he's going to end up at some point because they have to have him. I think to justify their position, they need to have Mo Salah playing in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and I think they want to also compete more in the international sports arenas. I think, it's really interesting because the Minister of Sport in Saudi, Prince Abdulaziz bin Turki, he used to be a racing driver. So
Did he?
yeah, and he's
Wow.
and he's quite young. He's in his 30s. So of course they want to have Formula One and they want to have all these different things, and champion that also for their kids because let's not forget, and this used to be um a massive problem out in the Middle East, that sports wasn't really a thing because it was too hot. Like when are you gonna go and like walk like where in England you could just go for a walk. That
Take your
like
umbrella with you, but yes, you could.
you couldn't. But obviously, and with them being very hospitable, they would also lay on loads of food and stuff, and that would bring a whole bunch of other problems with like obesity and things. So now this whole push for sports is also a push to improve the health of the younger generation, because the people that are now in their 30s and 40s, they have seen what happened to their parents and their grandparents, who then didn't have a lot of physical activity and they had a lot of health issues. So I think, now when you look to the Middle East, there's a big push for sport also to inspire their own generation to look after themselves. I mean, for example, Qatar has a national sports day, which is a holiday, and every ministry organizes some kind of sporting activities. And you see the ruler, Sheikh Tamim, who's quite young, every year he does something different. One year he went on a bike ride through Doha. Then he went, I think, in a canoe. Then he went playing football with the kids, and they rope everybody in. Like his mother went out to see kids playing things, and that's kind of like a really new thing. And of course, if you bring in big stars to that arena, that will inspire a whole bunch of new generations. So I think there's a lot more to it than just to say, oh, yes, they're just getting them for like a lot of money.
Mm. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, they're looking after the country's future, and to do that, they need people to inspire them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to, like they always say in like all the motivational speakers like Tony Robbins, you have to give people a vision and a purpose, because if there's no vision and a purpose, not even giving you a lot of money will move you forward, because you have nothing to aim for. So if you have something, and ideally, if you can do it as a nation, even better.
Mm. I can see you've been selling the country to people for a long time. It's
But it's not even like, for me, it's not even that I want to sell this to people. It's just more like what I've seen and what has happened, and who I've met out there.
oh,
And
and that comes across. So I didn't mean to say you're trying to sell the country. It comes across
yeah,
that you're passionate and you genuinely do love it as well. Yeah.
yeah, no, I just love it. And like the love and the kindness that I have seen from people there has just been really, really inspiring. And I was just there in May, and I went to a place called Taif, which is not far from Jeddah, which is not very far from the Red Sea. And they had like a rose festival. And my dad was like, "What do you mean you're going to Saudi and you're looking at roses? I didn't even know they had any." And I was like, "Yeah, they do." And it was so nice. I had the most amazing guide, and he was a Saudi. And he was so proud of his country, and he had so much history, and the places that he took us to, I would have never found them as a tourist by myself. Like, and it was so nice. And every single place we went to, people were just so nice, and they were so welcoming, and they're like, "Yeah, yeah, come and try this and let me show you this." And it was just lovely, and you kind of miss that sometimes in Europe a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't get that in Manchester. Yeah, certainly not in London. So,
No.
Karina, for anyone listening to this thinking, I want to find out more about Saudi Arabia, or I want to find out more about how I get to go there, or what are the requirements of going there, and they want to work with you, what's the best way for somebody to reach out to you?
I mean, I do a lot of things on LinkedIn about Saudi, like any kind of trends and things. I have a newsletter, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My company is called StarCat, star like the star in the sky hyphen cat CAT, and it's basically, a lot of people say this is a very odd name, but essentially, star comes from my 5-star hospitality background. So I say it's almost 5-star, and cat is consulting and training for the Middle East, so almost like 5-star consulting and training. So yeah, I have a website and LinkedIn and Instagram. I am at starcat_Corina.
Okay. I shall put the links for those below the podcast as well in the description. So
Perfect.
anyone listening to this or watching, just scroll down and you'll be able to get in contact with Karina that way as well.
Perfect.
Karina, thank you for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.